Okay, this is going to be a little interesting because it's been over a month since I taught lesson number 1 on Gideon. And I think maybe a brief review of what that lesson was when we spoke about Gideon. It was, guys, it was January the 14th, the last time I stood in the pulpit and gave you this lesson about Gideon. So I'm thinking, well, you might have forgot some of that. Matter of fact, in speaking to Brother Gordon on Monday night, he said he forgot it all. So, so along those lines, your cover sheet is actually not from tonight's lesson. The cover sheet actually goes backwards into the previous lesson that we did on Gideon. So as we look at that cover sheet, let's see what do we learn. We have a picture of a strange man, and it seems he's got himself some sort of something, looks like maybe a piece of wool or something that he's brooding over. Let's read the scripture. This is from Judges 6:36-37 from my NASB Bible. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will deliver Israel through me, as you have spoken, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry all around on the ground, then I will know that you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken." You know, Gideon was a reluctant warrior. You recall he was a reluctant warrior. He was actually a farmer. Gideon was a farmer. But God chose him. God chose him to deal with the Midianites and the Amalekites. Does anybody recall maybe what weapons of war that the 300 men that Gideon took against the Midianites, what were the 3 weapons of war? A torch, a trumpet, and a vase, or I call it a vase, a pitcher, right? So inside the pitcher was the torch. You remember that the Midianites had 35,000 soldiers. Gideon went against them with 300, only 300. And his weapons, a torch, a pitcher with a flame inside, if you will. So the weapons were insignificant, I guess you could say, but it's all about the power that God gave to Gideon. It's all about God's power, not Gideon. God gave Gideon all that power to be able to deal with 35,000. An army of 35,000 he defeated with only 300. I remind you, he surrounded them. They were in a valley sort of a place. He surrounded them with the 300 men. And so all 300 broke their pitchers at the same time, had their torches up and their bugles blowing, hollering, "A sword for Gideon, a sword for God." Well, they got so confused, you recall, they ended up killing each other. And so this is a little background, going back to the original story that we taught in January, just to kind of jog your memory and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember that." Okay. So our task tonight in part 2, we're going to part 2, okay? And you have your scriptures, of course, as you always do. And your scriptures we will use to teach the rest of the story, as old Paul Harvey might say, and now for the rest of the story. Okay, so we know how far the story has gone so far. We know that Gideon took 300 and basically confused the Midianites and the Amalekites, and they ended up turning their own swords on each other. Okay, so what about the rest of the story? We're going to be entirely in chapter 8, exclusively chapter 8 of Judges. Okay, it's all from chapter 8. And so let's take a look at the first verse, or verses, okay? So we're in Judges 8, 4 and 5. Judges 8, verse 4 and 5. So I'll read the verse for you and then give you a bit of elaboration about the verse. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan, crossed over, they were weary, and yet they continued to pursue. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." Okay. The Israelite reinforcements had destroyed many of the fleeing Midianites. The Midianites had begun to run, trying to get across the Jordan to escape. They were pursued by Gideon and his 300. Gideon sought to get food for his men from two different groups. The group from Succoth and Puniel. You'll just have to bear with me on pronunciations tonight. But both groups refused to help. He asked for food for my soldiers, for my men. They both refused. They'll pay for that. This was a testament by both groups that they were going to ally themselves, not with Gideon and God, but with the Midianites and the Amalekites. They refused to feed the army. Therefore, we must assume they were allying themselves with the Midianites and the Amalekites. They went against the Lord and Gideon, his deliverer. I tell you, they would pay dearly for that. Okay, number 2 is verse 7 and 8. Verse 7 and 8. Gideon said, "All right." He's talking to those two groups who refused. Gideon said, "All right, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." That sounds pretty rough, doesn't it? He went up there from Peniel and spoke similarly to them, and the men of Peniel answered him just as the men of Succoth had answered. Okay. So they both refused to help Gideon's army. Okay? He tells them, "You're going to pay. You're going to pay for refusing to help us." Okay. All right, number 3, which is 10 through 12. Number 3 is 10 through 12. Now, Zebah, remember these are the kings. Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000. That's all that were left, y'all, from the 135,000. Only 15,000 remained. All that were left of the entire army of the sons of the east, for the fallen were 120,000. 120,000 had fallen. Only a small number remained. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah and attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the entire army. That tells us, when it says routed the entire army, basically that he killed the remainders of the army were killed by Gideon and the 300. Okay. So let's take a look at that. I remind you that Gideon threatened to punish them in retribution for their hostilities. To the people of Succoth, he said, "I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." The meaning is basically unclear, but scholars seem to believe it means he would drag them through the briars and the thorns, and they would die. They would die. To the people of Peniel, "I will tear down your tower." This is the only place they had to hide. This was the tower where they felt secure. He said, I will tear it down. It was a fortress where the people went for safety. As we said, the two Midianite kings arrived with a surviving force of only 15,000. That was 11% of the original force. That's all that was left. Gideon followed a caravan route and launched a surprise attack, capturing the two kings and routed their army. Okay. Number 4, 16, 17. Number 4 is 16 and 17. He took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. He tore down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of that city as well. So as we said, he would take revenge on both of these groups of people because they chose not to feed his army. Okay. Returning northwest through a mountain pass, Gideon was able to capture a young man from Succoth and forced the boy to write down the 77 officials of the city's names. Gideon then carried out his threat to punish the elders of the city with thorns and briars and death. Gideon also destroyed the tower of Peniel, killing all the men. Okay. So he was taking a bit of a revenge, was he not, on those who chose not to help his army. Okay. I think, guys, that takes us to number 5, if I'm staying caught up here. 18 through 21. Number 5 is 18 through 21. 18. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? They said they were like you, each one resembling the son of a king. He said they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise up and kill him. But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise up yourself and fall on us, for as the man, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. Okay. So that's 18 through 21, y'all. That takes us to number 6, which is 22 and 23. I finished the story by telling you that with the two Midianite kings, Gideon interrogated them regarding the slaying of several brothers of his at Tabor. Gideon felt obligated by the duty of blood revenge. He asked his oldest son to kill them, but he was still a young man and was not ready to do such a task. The kings bravely invited Gideon to take care of it, and Gideon obliged. Gideon obliged by killing the two kings. He felt like it was his obligation by blood to revenge those they had killed that were his brothers. Okay. 22 and 23, number 6. Okay, we recall everything that Gideon has done. How do the Israelites feel about them now? 22, 23. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son and your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Okay. Following the significant victory, the Israelites turned to Gideon with the request that you be king, that you, your son, your grandsons, create a dynasty of leadership. Gideon declines. The Lord will rule over you. Okay. Item 7, 24 through 27. Remembering that we're trying to complete the story of Gideon as we go through this. We're going to go all the way to Gideon's death. As we look at these scriptures, we're going to go all the way to the death of Gideon. Okay. 24 to 27 are our verses. 24. Gideon said to them, I would request, sometimes I add a word in here, one thing of you. My Bible says, yet Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from your spoils, the spoils of war, for they had gold earrings. They said, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from their spoils. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. I'm going to convert that for you in a moment. Today, in today's, yeah. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neckbands that were on the camels' necks, Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Okay. Clarification, y'all. Though Gideon rejected kingship, Gideon did request a share of the plunder in the form of gold, earrings, and such. If we translated out the value, and it was, by the way, 43 pounds of gold. Now, you can imagine what that was worth. 43 pounds of gold is what the final take was. Anybody got a guess how much the value of that was? My research tells me that 43 pounds of gold, and I think this may be during their time, because this doesn't sound high enough to me. My research said 3,269,737. $3 million worth of gold that he took. Now, this ephod, y'all, I know you've seen pictures of the high priest wearing a special garment on his chest, and it had all kinds of jewels on it and stuff like that. That's an ephod. It's not what Gideon had intended, that it be a priestly garment. Okay? So let's move on. Gideon took the gold and made an ephod, which is an ornate vestment worn by the high priest. A religious object, but it would lead to idol worship. The people worshiped the ephod, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Gideon did not intend for this to occur. He intended the ephod to serve as a memorial to what God had done. That was his idea, but the people turned it around and began to worship the ephod. You see where we're going. We're going right back to apostasy. Okay. So that was 7, y'all. Going to take us now to 8. And number 8 says, look at 28. Okay, it's in one verse, 28. This is interesting. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel. They did not lift up their heads anymore. The land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Look what Gideon accomplished. There was peace after this for 40 years. Of course, we know the stories of Israel, and that's not going to last, of course. So let's see what we have. As a result of the rout of the Midianites, the land enjoyed peace for 40 years. This is the last period of peace in Israel. The last period of peace in Israel was this 40-year period. Okay. So that's good to know, isn't it? The last one. Okay. Number 9 is 29 to 32. 29 to 32. 29. Jerubbaal. Okay. Here's what we got. You remember that Gideon tore down the altar to Baal, destroyed the tree thing. Gideon destroyed that because God told him to. Well, that actually belonged to his father. So his father gave him a nickname, called him Jerubbaal. Okay? That means let Baal contend. Let Baal contend. You know, Baal was a bad, bad thing to be worshipped. You know, we know that. We know about Baal. You know. So let's look at what we got. 29 to 32. Let's finish that. Okay. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon, same person, right? Jerubbaal and Gideon, one and the same person. Now Gideon had 70 sons. Some of you are going to remember this story about the 70 sons. Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Abimelech. 32. And Gideon the son of Joash died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah in the Abizrites. Abizrites. Okay. Though Gideon, working on number 9 here, though Gideon declined kingship, he generally lived like a king. He had many wives who bore him 70 sons. He also had a concubine who bore him a son named Abimelech. This would set the stage for the next downward spiral in Israel's history of apostasy. It all begins going backwards with the death of Gideon. Once Gideon was gone, everything began to go backwards again. Okay. It all began again with the death of Gideon. Okay. Number 10, y'all. 33 to 35. 33 to 35. 33. Then it came about, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Okay, they went right back to Baal, y'all. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They forgot what God had done through Gideon. Nor did they show any kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done for Israel. They showed no respect for Gideon and everything he had done. I tell you that Gideon's death triggered an immediate return to idol worship. They set up Baal-berith as their god. They began to worship a new idol, if you will, not new, but a continuation of Baal. Their failure to show gratitude to the family of Gideon. Here's a kicker, y'all. Remember Abimelech? Their failure to show gratitude to the family of Gideon may have led to and accounted for the apparent ease with which the 70 sons of Gideon were murdered by Abimelech minus one. He murdered each and every son of Gideon. Why would he do that? What was he after? He wanted to be king. He had to take out, in his mind, anybody who had a natural heirship to the king to become king. In order for himself to become king, he killed all 70 sons of Gideon minus one in order to secure his power to become king, to remove all legitimate sons who could contest his rule to be king.